from the seller's perspective, earnouts can be a great tool to get additional compensation after closing. What I generally tell sellers, though, is to transact at a level that you're comfortable enough if the closing consideration is the only thing you ever see. Earnouts are by far the most highly litigated part of M&A deals. On both sides, candidly. Sellers litigate just as much when there is a legitimate, failure to meet an earnout hurdle, just as much as buyers are to play games to keep an earnout down. Again, I don't want to scare people that the amount of buyers out there like committing fraud that are just like playing games to not pay earnouts. That's pretty rare, right? But it does happen with enough regularity and not even necessarily in bad faith, right? Just buyers implementing new policies, procedures, business practices that they think are going to grow the business that don't pan out the way that they hope to. And so sellers need to at least analyze the deal, that any upside is true upside. And if it's a $5 million cash purchase at closing and up to $1.5 million of earnout, am I comfortable and happy if when all the dust settles, I've only walked away with that $5 million? If I'm not happy with that, I need to be rethinking the deal structure and the deal valuation, just because they are highly litigated. There's a lot of things buyers can do in the business that can cause a failure to meet an earnout. Like I said, even if it's not bad faith. And usually a good buyer and buyer's counsel is going to craft an earnout in a way that gives them cover to take legitimate business steps and practices and things like that, as long as it's not intended to avoid an earnout, and they're actually trying to grow the business, but it doesn't actually pan out, then there's no liability for the buyer. So yeah, that's kind of my take on earnouts is, if you think, I think there's a narrower band of where they make sense, and that's usually going to be a business that's being sold in a pretty steep upcycle. Buyers just cannot responsibly pay a multiple on trailing 6 months EBITDA. You just can't, right? So if you're really in a period of growth and you believe wholeheartedly that that's going to sustain, but a buyer's got to look at like 3 years trailing average or something like that to protect against some downside, then an earnout could make sense. But you just got to be comfortable that you may not see it.
Now, I think you hit the nail on the head. You got to be comfortable with what you get on date, like closing day, and then you want and you hope, and you whatever your role is to get the earnout to be earned, you can be a part of that. But you've got to be comfortable with the $5 million. I think you said, because you might not get that, and then you made a point a minute ago about the business owner who's owned it for 30 years and all the skeletons. Well, the new owner is going to understand how to potentially hide that. It doesn't mean that they're going to have ill will and try to not pay you, but it also doesn't mean that they go, wait, I got to pay $1 million this year, but man, if I had $1 million the next year, I could make 3 or 5 million, and try to manipulate that in a way, just like you might do as an owner now. So I always tell owners, look at the perspective from a buyer. Like what might you do if you were going to buy? And so it's not necessarily, from the new owner's perspective, if they got to pay this earnout, it's $1 million, let's use a term, and they go, man, if I had that $1 million, man, the next year we could really grow. But if I don't, we're going to stagnate. And so, as the current owner, what might you do? You might try to not do that. And we've seen plenty of owners who have done stuff for taxes and stuff like that to lower their income level. So it's not necessarily trying to cheat, but it's just how business owners think of how to maximize profit, how to grow the business, how to keep things going. And so those things come into play. And so you got to make sure that you have the right advice and understand how you would audit and stuff like that. And so I think earnouts are You know, if you're talking about selling a PE, obviously that's a different kind of animal. That's almost going to be they're going to expect you to come on board and stuff like that. So your
Yep.
exposure to watch it. But if you're selling to a strategic or to a a one-off buyer, it's probably a little bit different. Maybe unpack that. Like if you are selling to PE, because PE gets thrown around kind of like those big M&A deals, but there's really small PE groups that we've never heard of that are out there that are buying up companies. So if someone goes, well, should I sell to PE or the random buyer who comes after me? How should they think about those two different avenues?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it depends a lot on kind of motivations for selling and what you want out of a deal. If you are selling for a financial exit, you want to maximize your return, etc. Um, selling to PE is attractive, or at least it can be, right? Unless you're a new platform and then they want you to stay on and roll a significant portion of the purchase price, and then maybe that's not the exit you're looking for. I really think it's the two scenarios. If you want to maximize your financial exit and you're selling into an existing platform, individual buyers just can't compete with multiples that private equity can pay. They just can't, right? My business school friends love the word synergy, and I hate to use it, but there are a lot of synergies in rolling a company into an existing platform that allows a PE buyer to pay higher multiples than say an SBA backed or first time independent sponsor is ever going to be able to do. Um, that said, that they're going to change a lot of things in the business, right? I still see a lot of sellers that rightly or wrongly think about their business as quasi family. They want their people taken care of. They like the fact, right, that I was just reading on X the other day, uh, I think it was a podcast. It was a podcast I was listening to the other day, where the guy is not a private equity fund, but he's built a very successful holdco, and he was explaining that like he had an employee who was a long time, really dedicated employee who I think a family member got cancer or something, and the company was able to pay for the treatments, and he's like, I never could have gotten a private equity board to approve that, like ever. But that's what I wanted to be able to do with my company. So again, it depends on what you're wanting to do, what you want for the company, where you see. Rightly or wrongly, it's easy for people in my seat to say, "Oh, I mean, you're selling the business. What do you care?" And you shouldn't think about employees like family. They're not your kids, but a lot of people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if you think you can align your values more with another individual buyer that just happens to be 20 years behind you in career but is going to think about your business as family, there that's fine. There may be some financial trade-offs. So that's kind of how I think about it, is like what are the incentives, and who is the right buyer to execute on that vision. And like I said, if you're looking for that exit, you want that cash in the bank and like sayonara, best wishes in the future. PE can be really attractive. Or you just realize you were a good, $1 to $5 million founder, but you're not the guy to take it to $50 million, rolling into a platform where you can continue. Maybe in that case, you want to roll equity and you want to continue to get upside and you want to continue to work. You just know that partnering with a platform is going to take you a lot further. That's the other time you're going to look at private equity. You're gonna have a lot harder time doing that with the random Main Street buyer down the street.